Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for choosing to spend the next 20 minutes with me, where we go a little deeper into what I have learned from my experiences across organizations in terms of maximizing value out of data science. Very quickly, as way of introduction, I am Sunanda Parthasarathy. I currently am at Dick's Sporting Goods, heading their data science organization. And before this, I've been at CVS, Wayfair, and startups in the Boston area, predominantly focusing within the AI machine learning space, digging deeper into how we can apply across the enterprise AI and figure out the best path forward for the organizations. And before this, I actually am trained in physics, and like many physicists, chose to move to the universe of data science, where the math is very similar, but the returns, I would say, are quicker. So let's jump right in, and hopefully the clicker will cooperate. Let's see. Great. So I wanted to start the talk with this 4x4 that many of you might have seen. This is from Deloitte, from one of their studies, but there are very similar ones done by other leading firms. But to me, like they all zero in on roughly these two axes represented here, which is measuring the maturity of an organization's AI investment or development. And they are essentially measured as how many AI applications are fully deployed and how much of outcomes they are getting out of these deployed applications. So right on the top right corner there, you see the transformers, as they call it, who are the high deployers and high achieving organizations with roughly more than 7 fully deployed AI apps, and outcomes being also more than 7. And right next to them are the path seekers, who are sort of getting there. They don't necessarily have too many deployed applications, but they are gotten it right in the sense that they are extracting maximum outcomes or value out of these minimum number of deployments they have made. And in the bottom, you have the starters, who are just getting their game on the AI front and realizing the value that it can bring to their organization. So low deployed haven't seen returns yet, but are working towards that phase. And in the underachievers are the bucket where something didn't work out right? So a lot of deployments, but not really getting the returns that they thought they would get. And so I would love for you guys to have this in the backdrop as we go through this talk, and where we try to identify the 3 or 4 major actions that these AI-fueled organizations take to maximize the value for their organizations using machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then where I want to weave in what I have seen in all these different, all the way from startup to enterprise scale organizations, and where I've seen things work, at least in my experience. And one of the common things that I've called out amongst all these studies, I feel, are 2 things that stood out to me that typifies AI-fueled organizations. One being leveraging data as an asset, right? There's a lot of investment made in these organizations to recognize data is their asset, and they're very strategically thinking about how to have their first-party data protected and centralized, and have put a lot of effort into thinking that way. And they have enabled it for the entire enterprise. It's not a thing that sits in a lake that only few people have access to. Typically, data meshes work best so that it is democratized. People have access across the organization. The other is, as they think about AI and machine learning, it is taught from a human-centered way. And I'll talk a little bit more as I talk about examples, what I mean by human-centered way. I think that the crux of it is how you think about your use cases that you want to start with when you think about where you want to deploy AI. There. So the 4 actions that this report from Deloitte has also identified, but as I mentioned in my literature survey, they all sort of narrow down with different ways of saying the same thing. But one being investing in leadership and culture, right? Today, given all the buzz around generative AI especially, there is a lot of optimism within the workforce for AI and what it can do for whether it's a data scientist team or whether it's a product team or the business team, what it can bring to their organizations. So there is a lot of optimism. The AI-fueled organizations recognize this and are harnessing that optimism and thinking about it from a very strategic point of view. And there is that leadership layer there that is thinking about how can I make AI the differentiator for this company. So there is that leadership layer that is working very closely with the workforce, harnessing this optimism and coming up with a strategy, right? Along with this, of course, there is a lot of change management, especially in bigger organizations where things have to change from the traditional IT ways of work, if you will. How do we do it? How do we do it in such a way that we are not building things that are throwaway? There's a lot of considerations that go into it. So these organizations are making it a very, very strategic priority to invest in leadership and culture, making sure there's a lot of cross-functional collaboration happening within the enterprise. The next step is transform operations. As we think about deploying AI within our organizations, the ways of working that we had before might not necessarily continue to work. And the biggest thing I would say, that's why we have a session called MLOps and platforms. There's a lot of nuance into thinking about how can we deploy MLOps and platform and APIs that will leverage all of the cutting edge work that's coming out of AI. There needs to be well redesigned workflows maybe, a lot of documented AI model life cycles, because the enterprise needs to understand where to pull in the data science teams and where to pull in the AI teams and how to interact with them. So a lot of understanding of how does a model life cycle look like needs to happen. The third point being orchestrate tech and talent. Different organizations tend to be at different points in their maturity of technology. So really understanding, and that's where that leadership plays a big role, really understanding where the technology is today for the organization, where is the talent level for the organization, making an honest, navel gazing, if you will, to understand, do we have the talent to build this? How do we leverage the plethora of off-the-shelf AI solutions that we have? What is the right strategy for this organization so we are differentiating ourselves? And I think that's where the first point really leans in to understand how to orchestrate the tech and talent so that not only do we hire the best for the organization, but we also grow the people within and figure out, make smart build and buy decisions. The fourth, if not the most important in my mind, is really coming up with the right use cases that accelerate outcomes, right? I know of many situations where there has been the energy, there has been a lot of interest in deploying AI for the organization, but the choice of use cases has not been right. And I think that is predominantly that lower bucket that we were talking about, where a lot of deployments have happened, but the outcomes have not been reaped. So really focusing on value drivers for the business, and that's where the business centricity is so important, understanding what drives value for the business today, and from there, peeling it back and understanding, okay, what is easy to implement given the tech and talent today, and how do we get there fast, and how do we iterate fast? So let me go through all these 4 points, and this is where I want to pull in some what I have seen in the field. So I think invest in leadership and culture. When we talk about AI, ML teams, or data science teams, whatever you want to call them, most of you will be familiar with this kind of a team structure or org structure. On one end, you have the centralized team. On the other end, you have an embedded team. Those tend to be the two extremes. Centralized, there are some advantages to it. There is that community of data science, AI, machine learning. And today, with the rapid growth this field is facing, this is crucial because there needs to be a lot of back and forth and knowledge sharing between the community of data scientists. There is the ability or freedom to have self-contained profiles of talent. What I mean by that is having your typical algorithm-centered data scientist, the machine learning engineers, the analyst, that whole spectrum within that organization, so you can be pretty self-sufficient in terms of deploying machine learning products. The other key aspect is these kind of centralized teams have a leader who can set the organizational strategy, who can be that voice in the room of the executives when strategic decisions need to be made on investment of AI and ML. The challenge that typically happens in these kind of centralized organizations is they can become too disconnected from business. So a lot will depend on that leader and making sure the leader is in the right rooms, and like a lot of dependency on that one single point person. On the other spectrum is embedded, where you typically have the data scientists fully embedded, whether it's within business or product teams. They are part of a cross-functional team of engineers, product owners, business analysts, what have you. The great thing about this is they are right there, very close to the problem that the business is facing today. So adoption is easy. They can get to that problem quickly, and given the right talent, can solve it quickly. In my mind, there are a few more disadvantages, if you will. There can be a lot of friction with the rest of the tech organization, because a single data scientist cannot deploy machine learning products, right? So they need all the other tech support system, and sitting within business or product, depending on how the organization goes, can be very hard. Hard to come up with what is the AI strategy, who is going to build that AI strategy for that organization. It's a bit iffy there. The talent and knowledge can become very siloed. There needs to be a lot of back and forth that it's very hard to make it happen unless there is it's a smaller kind of a team that knows each other. And to me, where in the places that I have worked and where I have tried to orchestrate this, somewhere in the middle, the hybrid has worked well for me. And the reason is really like trying to merge the two benefits from the two sides, right? Like investing in, like making sure there's an organizational strategy, making sure there's a community of data scientists who are constantly learning the latest and greatest and bringing it to the table. Embedded, you still have the data scientists who are embedded within the product teams. I'll talk a little bit more about the mechanics of that. They're still very close to the product or business, so they are running in sprints or whatever the methodology is. The challenge here can be typically the DS talent is embedded still, so they are very much focused. If it's in e-commerce, they are in e-commerce. If it's in merchandising, they are in merchandising. So it can become siloed, but with a good organizational strategy, that can be solved for. So going back to some of these aspects of the investing in leadership and culture and how we actually bring this together, wanted to bring some insights from today where I am at Dix and what we are trying to do there. At the crux of what Dix is, I think you guys must have seen the campaigns. Sports changes lives, right? Like that's what we believe and truly live. And what we are trying to do is how can we become that one-stop shop, not just a retail shop, but everything connected to sports. How can we become that advisor to that athlete who's walking through the doors of Dick's Sporting Goods? And we have recognized data and artificial intelligence as one of the key strategic pillars, and the way we think about how artificial intelligence can get us there is developing athlete personas, understanding what kind of an athlete are you. Are you the soccer mom who's very invested in your kids' soccer practice and is following every kick and every goal and is trying to get the best for that kid? Or are you the golfer who is trying to improve his or her next swing? So really understanding what kind of an athlete are you and how can we meet you where you are to help you in your journey of becoming not necessarily a professional athlete, but like your fulfilled athlete, right? Identifying points in an athlete journey so we can make connections there. Personalizing messaging, which is, I think, a common application, whether you talk about retail or other kind of advisor roles. Ensuring quick and seamless delivery of product or content. So how do we have an intelligent supply chain? How do we have an intelligent merchandising? Those are all the areas where we are trying to leverage artificial intelligence. And talking about the culture and how are we trying to make this happen, it's really around agile development and product support model. The whole technology organization works under the basis of a product support model with very clear levels of support. So the platform or the endpoint infrastructure, what have you, have these product support models, a maturity model associated with them. There's a lot of cross-functional agile team, and that's sort of what I've tried to depict there. We are trying to take the talent, the technology, the models, and really have an agile methodology that works well for all functions to bring together that final advisor role. The third point that I want to stress here is really making sure we have clear methodologies, measurement methodologies to measure value out of AI/ML. And that is, I think, sometimes often looked glossed over, because there's a lot of enthusiasm to deploy the product, but there has not been premeditated thought that goes into how am I going to measure the value of it? How do I make sure it is not a UI change that caused this impact versus the model causing the impact? Those are things that needs to be thought about before you actually run the test and deploy the product. And continuing on the trend of transforming operations that we talked about, I think ML operational best practices. So I talked to you briefly about how we run these agile methodologies and talking about life cycles. So there is a define, design, development, test, and deploy, right? And today I've given you examples of the technologies we use, but the crux is it is agile. So tomorrow, if for whatever reason the enterprise needs to move to different technologies, things are built in such a way that that move is easily done. It was a lot of hard work, but it is not something that we have to start all the way from the beginning and setting us back by a couple of years. And that's the crux. And I've sort of briefly, I'm not going to go too deep into the details here because in the interest of time, but essentially defining the problem, the different functions that come together, then designing it, developing it, deploying it, testing and deploying it. And that is sort of how that embedded structure that I talked to you about works. The other crucial aspect that I was mentioning, and as I said, the crux of this session is MLOps, right? We recognize the importance of MLOps, and given the time that we were at, the data science team stood up its own MLOps platform. And it really is a best-in-class platform where the data scientists can do all of their work from experimentation to production, right? We built it in collaboration with the engineering teams. It comes with a lot of collection of tools, processes, most importantly, standards. So every single data scientist has that Docker or whatever container that they can start their project on, which brings everybody to that same level of maturity of data pipelines. And we call it Marilyn, by the way. So very quickly, what Marilyn is, it has all these elements which really helps the data scientists starting in like their first week of joining the team. They can quickly get on board with a project that they want to, and it is of the same standard that a 2-year person who's working there. They don't have to build it from scratch. The fourth point that I mentioned, and I'm like running quickly out of time, so I'm going to run through this very fast and we can take it in question and answers, is really selecting your use cases. Given where we are at Dix, we are starting here, right? Like it is a breadth of it, and you can see some of them are at that advanced stage where we are truly deploying applications, and some where we are still working with the product teams and business to do a lot of back-end models and figuring out how we can come up with that unified platform that will, for example, power all of fulfillment. So the important thing is we went with the lens of where can we get the deployment faster, where will it add actual value to the business, and that's why we went. We didn't go after the next best deep learning model that we all wanted to build. And very quickly, and I'm going to wrap it up here, to me, it's like very similar in the other places I've worked. how you select your use cases really underpins the value you get out of AI and machine learning. And in CVS, there was a lot of focus within the retail pharmacy universe. There was a lot of focus on how do we connect to the customer or the patient, and those were the use cases we ended up choosing. And Wayfair, where again, when I was there, it was getting out of the startup into that growth mode. It really was, I would call Wayfair now as one of the top right transformers, but really we went after something when we wanted to test out a methodology in reinforcement learning. We didn't directly go into a real-time thing. We started with emails on batch mode, really learned to crawl in that technology before we really understood how it worked for the business, and that's how we were able to generate value very quickly. With that, I am at 00 on the clock, and I will say thank you. I hope you took away something from this talk, and happy to take any questions.